So during this is the second week of the class, and during the second week, we're going to talk a little bit about what transgenderism is, where it comes from, why people have it, why some people are transgender and others are cisgender, and why there's so much variability in the way people feel transgender under that large umbrella um, of transgender individuals. So um, one of the Probably the first places to start is the fact that for many years, transgender individuals were considered to be mentally ill. And in fact, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, which is the guide for mental health professionals, and it's what professionals and insurance companies use to document diagnoses. For many years, transgender behaviors were classified most recently as gender identity disorder, but historically as fetishes and a variety of other um, sexual disorders. Um, DSM-5, the fifth edition of the DSM, came out only this past year, and in that version of the DSM, transgender behaviors were classified as gender dysphoria. That is a condition in which gender is not clear to the individual, and because of that, because of the stresses that the individual faces in his or her culture, um, they may experience a variety of other symptoms such as depression, anxiety, and various other um, symptoms that really come from the fact that society isn't very welcoming of people with gender dysphoria. So this is a big change, and it raises a lot of questions about whether or not insurance companies will or will not cover um, gender dysphoric um, meetings with therapists. But whenever gender dysphoria is also accompanied by things such as depression, then obviously that would be covered by most insurance companies. But nonetheless, there are some concerns that this change could have some effects on insurance coverage. On the other hand, I think most transgender individuals um, are quite happy to see it no longer classified as a mental illness. So if gender dysphoria isn't a mental illness, then how does it occur, and why do some people have it, and why is it so variable in its expression? And one of the possible likely um, mechanisms for people having a transgendered brain is genetic, and one of the genes that we have in our body allows us to recognize androgens or hormones such as testosterone when they are flowing through our body. So if we have a gene that is sensitive to androgens, and certain types of that gene are more sensitive than other types of that gene. That is, it's a polymorphic gene. It's a gene with a variety of different structures. Turns out that long androgen receptor genes uh, reduce the sensitivity of the body to recognizing androgens flowing through the system, whereas short androgen receptor genes do a very good job of recognizing androgens when they're flowing through the body. So consequently, if we have a male fetus early in development and it is producing some male hormones, but the body isn't recognizing those because it has a long androgen receptor gene, then there is some likelihood that that individual could be a male to female transgender individual. And if that fetus had a short androgen receptor gene, then there is some likelihood that the individual would be cisgender. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that long AR genes produce male to female transgender individuals, but there seems to be a relationship, and in fact, a study done which compared AR genes in male to female individuals and cisgender individuals did find some differences. So the other thing that happens when a fetus is exposed to androgens such as testosterone during fetal development is that there are other characteristics of the body which change besides the brain. So the brain may be masculinized if it has a short AR gene. But it turns out, too, that the length of the ring finger and index finger in many fetuses is influenced by exposure to androgens as well. So, for instance, if a baby is not a fetus is not exposed to androgens or very much, then typically the index finger will be longer than the ring finger. If the baby is exposed to androgens, in other words, it's a male baby producing male hormones and exposed to those hormones, then oftentimes the ring finger will be longer than the index finger. And at this point, you're probably staring at your hand. Now, the finger length ratio of index to ring finger is not entirely predictable, but if you measure enough fingers on enough people and plot the averages, on average, individuals exposed to androgens in the fetus tend to have a longer ring finger. So there are other factors besides masculinization of the brain that are influenced by this androgen receptor gene as well. So that's one possible explanation for why some people are trans and other people are not. Somewhat related to that is the exposure of individuals to endocrine disruptors or estrogens, hormones in the environment, such as estrogen. So think about environmental contaminants that can interfere with the recognition of hormones within the body. And these might be pesticides, certain types of plastics, antimicrobials, and some flame retardants have been found to cause changes in the gonadal development of some species, especially aquatic species, where some of these contaminants have gotten into the streams and other water bodies. There's some, at least speculation that these sorts of endocrine disruptors could have an effect on the fetus as well. So if you think about genital development occurring very early in the development of a fetus, fetus is then exposed during those first few months to environmental contaminants that interfere with the ability of the fetus to recognize hormones within its own body. Those endocrine disruptors could alter the masculinization properties of the brain or feminization properties of the brain, and consequently lead to some effect on gender identity. It's not entirely clear whether this is true in humans, but there have been some speculations that there might be some effects soon. Another possible effect that's been widely talked about is our psychosocial effects, and that is if a baby is born and then raised by a family in which one parent is absent, then that may affect the development of gender identification in that individual as they get older. So for instance, a baby boy raised by a single mom without any males in the environment would under this assumption, then be more likely to be male to female trans. Recent study, though, by Veal et al. Indicate that biological factors, the androgen receptor genes or possibly environmental contaminants, play a role in the development of gender variant identity, and it's likely that psychosocial variables, such as the ones I just described, may play a role, but only in interaction with these other factors. So for instance, if the baby has a androgen receptor gene which is long, and consequently it is less likely to have the brain masculinized while it's in a fetus, then And then that baby is raised in an environment where males are absent, then that baby may be more likely to express a male to female behavior, and vice versa for female to males. So there's a slight association with development during early childhood years, but the evidence is still quite unclear. So the bottom line is, how does transgenderism occur? We don't know for sure, but there certainly seem to be some biological factors, and those might very well interact with psychosocial factors. Because transgenderism is probably not entirely psychosocial, efforts at reparative therapy are not likely to be effective. And in fact, reparative therapy, that is therapy that causes, would, if it were effective, cause an individual to have transgender feelings, suddenly no longer have those feelings, become cisgender as a result of the therapy, simply don't work. And the recent study by the American Psychological Association, well, actually 5 years ago now, showed that not only does it not work, there's significant evidence that it can also be harmful. And some states have, in fact, banned reparative therapy. Nonetheless, Google reparative therapy for transgenderism on the web, and you'll find that there are still organizations which propose that reparative therapy can be used to solve this, quote, problem for individuals. Not likely to be something that many people would follow, although some of these reparative therapy organizations are closely related to religious organizations, and if an individual is trans and also very religious, then they might be prone to trying reparative therapy. One question that's often asked is, how many transgender people are there? And it's highly variable. In fact, the estimates that have been proposed range anywhere from 1 in 250 people to 1 in 10,000 people. So a wide range of estimates. A recent estimate by Lynn Conway had the prevalence of male to female transsexuals at its view to 1 in 500, and as many as 1 in 250. So if we assume that's true, then at the OSU on-campus student body of approximately 25,000, there would be 50 to 100 trans students at OSU. I know about 25 of those, but we have to assume that many are not out. We also, if we take the percentage that is used by the city of Los Angeles in their estimate of transgender individuals in the Los Angeles population, about 0.1 to 0.3% of the total would be transgender, and that would be about 25 to 75 at OSU. So that gives you a range, and it's probably on the 50 to 100 range would be my guess, and probably far more common than people are aware. So because many people are not out, because some trans people transition as transsexuals from one sex to another, and then go on about their lives, and really no one knows that they're trans, people probably encounter quite regularly on the OSU campus transgendered individuals and simply aren't aware of it. One of the biggest issues that transgender individuals face is other sorts of marginalization. So a white male to female transgender individual probably is going to experience a fairly high degree of discrimination in most societies, in most aspects of our society. However, a black or Latina transgender individual can experience much higher degrees of discrimination. And so the experiences of white trans people are quite different from the experiences of trans people of color. A recent study by Meyer in 2012 found that black and Latina respondents perceived anti-queer violence as implying that they had negatively represented their racial communities, whereas white respondents typically didn't have that kind of a feeling. And so not only were the Black and Latina respondents perceiving themselves as and actually receiving anti-queer violence, they also had this guilt associated with the fact that they are basically somewhat letting down their own race. So there are a lot of intersectionalities of race, transgenderism, but also intersectionalities of simply real discrimination and perceived guilt for doing things that others in their community may not support. So if we think about the effects of marginalized individuals because of their race, ethnicity, economic status, rural versus urban, are they veterans, are they disabled, are they from certain countries, have a certain religion, certain sexual orientation, all of these things intersect with being trans, and because of that, the effects on the individual can be profound. Because of that, and because of the intersectionality that does occur, and because of the high degree of marginalization for some trans people of color, many of people who are at wit's end, simply have no other means to survive, resort to suicide, resort to escaping through alcohol and drugs, resort to sex as a source of income to simply allow themselves to live. And so we see high levels of HIV in some trans populations in some cities, especially where there are individuals who are highly marginalized in those societies. So think about if you are cisgender, think about these questions. If you're a transgender, you'll understand, I think. But think about, have you ever been asked, what do you think caused you to be cisgender? Does anybody ever ask you that? Because they ask transgender people that. When and how did you first decide that you were cisgender? Is it possible that your gender identity is just a phase and you'll get better after time? By the way, I thought this for about 3 or 4 decades. Your cisgender behavior doesn't offend me as long as you don't try to force it on me. So think about someone who is coming into a society or culture, community in which they don't pass well, and individuals in that society are offended by that. Why would they be offended? But they are. Do you really consider it safe to expose your children to cisgender teachers? I was on a Pride panel several years ago and asked whether or not we would consider having the Pride panel for the high school students in town. And every one of us agreed that that would be a wise thing to do. And then that was followed up by, but you'd never be able to do this for elementary school kids, obviously. And I was actually appalled. Why wouldn't we want to do this for elementary school kids? But that was the reaction of the crowd. Why do you insist on being so obvious, making a public spectacle of your gender identity? That happens a lot for people who don't pass. There seem to be very few happy cisgender people. Techniques have been developed to help you change to become transgender if you really want to. Have you considered reparative or reversion therapy? That's never asked of a cisgender person. It's often asked of transgender individuals, especially in communities where the knowledge around transgender behavior is simply very poorly understood. Since you're white, you probably had a troubled childhood, so it's understandable that you're cisgender, right? And this comes to the intersectionality piece, where certain individuals are marginalized in so many ways within their communities that more privileged individuals try to make excuses for them. And the other important thing that I just want to finish with before we finish this week's discussion, please take a look at the Blackboard site and do these signed readings, but also check out some of the videos that I posted online. But one thing that I do want to point out is that we will have individuals coming into class who will share their stories with you. And that's important, but none of us, no one of us, can speak for the entire transgender community. Just as no single African American person can speak for the entire African American community. So we hope that over the course of the term, the visits by the outside people, questions that you might ask of me, questions you might ask of other people you know who are trans, you'll start to get a sense for the variability in the spectrum of ways in which trans people live their lives.